My name is Priyanka Dahiya. I'm the co-founder at Daily Wage Worker platform. We know that COVID-19 did not go anywhere, and now it's worse than ever. With the horrific rise in COVID cases, a lot of us will be able to stay home, but migrant workers do not really have a choice. Maharashtra has already seen thousands of workers at train and bus stations. They are confused, scared, and some infected with the virus. Daily Wage Worker platform, along with their partner organizations, have been working relentlessly for the past 1 year for the workers. Our NGO partners have conducted a survey of over 8,000 migrants in 3 states over the past 6 months, and we've launched a new report with policy recommendations for these migrants. In this webinar, we will be discussing the survey findings from the report, a comprehensive framework to resolve the migrant problem, and for that, how we all can play a very significant role there. And a lot of us have already been playing a very significant role in the migrant crisis for the past 1 year. Now, without any delay, we will turn the time over to Siddharth Prakash, our first speaker today, who is actually the founder of Daily Wage Worker platform and has been doing amazing work in the past 1 year. Over to you, Siddharth.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome all our participants and all our esteemed panelists here for this exciting webinar that we're doing on the launch of our survey findings, as well as working with you, hopefully, to establish new public-private partnerships to really address the root causes of this migrant worker crisis. So a little bit about Daily Wage Worker quickly. So as Priyanka mentioned, we started in response to the COVID-19 pandemic over a year ago. A group of volunteers who came together, set up this platform, which was trying to, during the lockdowns, last year, try to decipher what was going on in the ground across the country. So we created a platform and we documented 200 practices of relief efforts to the migrants from NGOs, state governments, workers, the corporates and others. And from there, as things got worse, we moved on to the ground. So we started a crowdfunding campaign and we raised $50,000 to feed 30,000 workers in Maharashtra in the slums over there. And with the onset of the monsoons last year, we started looking at healthcare. So we came up with an emergency health package targeting migrants in slums that could not access healthcare using telemedicine, mobile health, and social distancing. And we also did a survey to understand what is the health-seeking behavior and challenges they face on the ground. And then moving forward as the lockdowns at that time opened up, looking at employment, rehabilitation, and so forth. And we came up with the idea of the Rozgar survey to really address some of the challenges facing the workers. And the biggest challenge that came up again and again was the lack of data to understand, who these workers are, where they are, what are their needs, and so forth. So we started the Rozgar survey campaign and took it from there. I'll just want to share some data with you. So I'll just quickly show some slides. So here you see, this is a picture taken yesterday from Delhi railway station, and the crowds are gathering again. I think, there is that sense of fear, as Priyanka said, and, we don't want history to repeat itself, which is why we are here today. Very quickly, I think we all know this. So, the whole lockdowns and the COVID-19 pandemic has really exposed the root causes of this crisis. So, these are mobile populations with no proper documentation. There's still no comprehensive data, and recent estimates by researchers show that there are 600 million migrants in India today. The lack of portability and access to state benefits continues to be a very big challenge. Our data and also World Bank data shows that 47% of the migrants are really unable to access these state benefits. Moreover, the labor laws of the country, there's a lot of poor implementation of them. So while on paper, a lot of services, protection, welfare schemes are offered to them, they're not able to access this. And they face a lot of exploitation at the hand of contractors and employers. Also in the destination states where these migrants move from the east to the south and west, they do not have voting rights, which also disenfranchises them and creates a lot of challenges in terms of them being empowered and able to access food security, healthcare, livelihoods, and other benefits. I think we know very well the challenges, that they faced last year from April to June in the destination states, the in transit, and also in the source states. So what we try to do actually, we partnered with the Jindal Global University and our NGO partners, and we did a survey from September 2020 to February 21. It was a baseline survey and a needs assessment that was done by our NGO partners. So we had CYDA, Rice Foundation in Maharashtra. We had the Mahashakti Foundation in Orissa, and Aditi and TSN in Bihar. And endlessly, actually, they volunteered their time and their field workers to actually do this survey of 8,000 migrant workers over the past 6 months. It was the first comprehensive survey where we moved beyond looking at age, sex, and occupation details to really understand the underlying roots of the challenges they face at the workplace, in their skill sets, what are their career aspirations, their knowledge, how do they access government schemes, food security, and healthcare. And the findings from one of our NGOs in Bihar was that, the root causes lie in the rigid structural social mores of, rural settings in India, which is, looking at caste discrimination, lack of opportunities in these states, which pushes people to migrate to the urban areas. And what a number of studies, including ours, has shown that women have been worst impacted due to a loss of earnings, increased exposure to poverty, alcoholism, and domestic violence. In Bihar, particularly, we see there's a rising indebtedness, which is leading to a rise in girl trafficking and child labor. And over across the country, the closure of schools has deprived millions of children of access to education, but also the midday meal, which is a major source of food and nutrition for these kids, and that's leading to widespread malnutrition. So today, 1 in 3 kids are malnourished in India. And just to show you here, the numbers that we have found from our study. So there are the underlying structural issues that I talked about. 90% of these 8,000 workers are not aware of their legal rights. 85% have no written job contracts, although a lot of them are actually getting monthly salaries and in some kind of formal employment. 81% belong to marginalized communities. 77% had no access to social security benefits during the lockdowns and as late as February this year. 75% have no source of income. 60% have no ration cards, as a result of which 45% still face food shortages, and 31% have no access to healthcare. So as we see here, most of these workers have not got contracts. They are largely in monthly salary working conditions, and over 65% of them have got jobs through contractors. And what we're seeing actually is that over the last 1 year, through the work of our partners, that the state governments are working, developing apps, setting up relief programs. NGOs are on the ground providing ration, hygiene, or helping them access government schemes. The corporates are connecting workers with employers and getting them back into the economy. The donors are giving funding, providing best practices and technical expertise. And others are looking at, improving the skills and knowledge and rights awareness of these workers. But some of it is happening in silos, and it's having a limited impact scale on the ground. So we're really trying to propose here a multi-sectoral approach. And the idea really is to look at developing what we have done with our partners is a comprehensive framework to address the root causes of the migrant worker crisis. So here we're looking at a couple of key components that make up this framework. One is data collection on both migrants and employers, which we talked about through our survey. The second is connecting migrants to employers so they get jobs. And then we need to look at providing training and skills to workers to start their own local enterprises, particularly for the migrants who don't want to come back to the cities. Also looking at, educating workers about their rights and entitlements at the workplace, and facilitating access and benefits with local NGOs and labor departments to the government schemes, and then working with lawyers and legal faculty to actually create some awareness of the rights and obligations of both employers and governments towards these workers, and enabling them to access these. So we just want to quickly touch on some examples of how this is already happening with our partners. So we have organizations like Bandhu and Bharat Shamak that are using mobile apps and registering workers in different states and connecting them to employers. We have a lot of skill training that is taking place, and creating rehabilitation programs to empower these workers over the last 1 year. So, for example, CYDA, has assisted almost large numbers of women to produce and sell 100,000 masks. They're looking at supporting street vendors, creating employment for the youth. Mahashakti Foundation in Orissa, one of the poorest parts of the country, have been working with self-help groups to develop skills, to look at agriculture, income, crafts, handicrafts, and get them connected to government schemes and local banks. At the same time, TSN in Bihar has been working to protect women from girl trafficking, child labor, rehabilitation of these people. And our partner Aditi in Bihar has been creating local databases of migrant workers, connecting them to various schemes to start local enterprises. So here you see, the Manrega scheme that we'll hear about, the Garib Kalyan Rozgar Abhiyan, and Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme. These are schemes that our partners are working with the local labor departments to try and get the workers registered into these schemes and benefit from them. And this is a project taken up by the Jindal Global University law faculty, where over the last year, they have developed a comprehensive analysis of all the government schemes and labor laws in the country. And they have explained these using audio visuals and local languages that can be very easily explained to the migrant workers and laborers with NGOs and others in the different states. And some of our partners have already disseminated this and educated some of the workers about their rights. So here you see in Hindi the different posters that are showing you, awareness about wages, safety, leave, and other critical basic rights that these people need to be entitled to. Here, what we're really proposing, and this is really what we want to do to kick off today's webinar, is public-private partnerships where we try to create a federation of government, donor, corporates, NGOs, and workers to collectively address this problem, because each one has a very critical role, as we can see here. So state governments, are looking at data collection, welfare schemes, the new labor codes, the migrant worker policy, providing registration cards, cash transfer, microfinance. The UN and donors can provide technical expertise on migration policies, international best practices, project funding, technical resources. Corporates and industry can actually generate the employment to absorb these people, contribute to skill development, and really support them with their CSR programs. The NGOs are providing data collection, skill development, supporting local livelihoods, getting into legal awareness. And the workers, when they start getting all this, the idea is that, there's data on them, there's documentation, they have access to government schemes, diversified skills, they can start new enterprises and be aware of their legal rights. And this is a model that, we really like to discuss and request all our presenters to sort of focus on when they talk about their work and how we can collaborate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siddharth. Some of our partners, of course, are here, and some of the people already knew about this survey, but I'm sure a lot of other participants learned a lot. I myself is very proud of this survey findings in the report, because it was really need of the hour. And the survey findings and what Daily Wage Worker has been doing with their partners has set the stage absolutely right. So we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Mr. Sanjay Awasthi. He's the head of International Organization for Migration in India, which is a UN agency. Welcome, Mr. Sanjay Awasthi. I would again request you to keep your talking points to 10 minutes. I do have short questions for all our speakers so that we can move in a directed way. So to start with, we would like to know that, how has IOM contributed to addressing the migrant worker crisis in India in the past 1 year? Over to you.
Thank you, Siddharth, for giving us such a comprehensive overview. And it captures some of the key challenges related to migrants fairly well. And thank you, Priyanka. And thanks to all the other panelists and participants. Indeed, a pleasure joining all of you on this occasion. So talking about IOM's work in India, as our mandate guides, whatever we do is focused around migrants and migration. And we work both at the international migration level as well as the internal migration level. But being a UN organization, many of our priorities are in accordance with the priorities of the member states. So we do whatever we do in a country, we do it in close collaboration with the concerned government ministries. So one of the things I wanted to highlight before coming down to IOM's work, apart from the vulnerabilities that Siddharth just now listed down, and some of them were very nicely put together by Aditi in Bihar. I just wanted to add one perspective that not all of them necessarily move out because of lack of employment opportunities in their native places. While majority of them do, some of them they are involved in aspirational migration. They want to look for better opportunities, better wages, and better growth possibilities. So that's something which I would just like to add. And in addition to that, very often when we speak about the internal migrants, or what we call domestic migrants, we often forget the migration that is induced by perennial natural disasters, primarily floods and cyclones. And just to give you a perspective, the highest disaster displacement in South Asia is in India, and which is one of the highest in the world. And on an average, almost 3.6 million people a year were displaced between 2008 and 2019. And majority of them because of floods. And as we all know, some of the regions in the Indo-Gangetic plains like UP, Bihar, and also West Bengal and Assam, they often face floods. And we have also witnessed 5 million new disaster displacements in 2019. And coming to more recent times, first half of 2020, which was just last year, there was almost more than 2 million, almost 3 million people were displaced because of disasters. So, and in addition to that, are factors related to climate change. A large part of our coastlines are being lost because of climate changes happening over the last few years. So in that context, when talking about the IOM perspective, IOM has been deploying some of the tools very effectively in terms of, number one, helping the disaster-induced mobility and the migrants. We call it displacement tracking matrix. It initially got started in the context of the Syrian refugees, and then subsequently it was evolved and improved in many other different settings. So that is one area which I particularly wanted to highlight. And coming to more specific contributions, recent contributions as well as the current engagements. One of the areas, again, which we, when we refer to the migrants, we often forget is a very significantly large number of Indian migrant workers have lost their jobs overseas. And as we all know, majority of them go to the Gulf Cooperation Council member countries. And many of them are, especially from the Indo-Gangetic states, they are relatively low skilled. And they faced a lot of challenges in terms of loss of jobs, wages, and they were also stranded in many of these countries. So, and related to that has been a much bigger challenge with the government in terms of having a better understanding about the migration related data. So the Ministry of External Affairs requested us to help them in having a very comprehensive look at the existing migration data management frameworks as they exist now. And as we all know, there are a number of ways in which the international migration related data is captured. But then one of our priorities is going to be to have a critical look at it and recommend how it could be done differently, and especially bearing in mind the women-specific needs and problems of women migrant workers. The second priority area for us has been the status of migrant workers in the garment sector. And I'm sure you must be aware that India is the second largest exporter of garments in the region, followed by Bangladesh. And because of that, as well as a number of government policies, it has attracted huge investments in various parts of the country, but primarily in and around Delhi NCR and few pockets in South India. And this sector deploys migrant workers on a very large scale. And many of the challenges which we often come across related to the migrant workers in general are applicable in these contexts also. So we have been focusing on ethical recruitment practices and better working conditions and some related perspectives. In that context, we're also closely working with some of the leading clothing brands, because that's where the real push or pull comes from. While last year we were dealing with a number of challenges, we were also closely working with the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, because as Siddharth, you mentioned in your presentation that quite a few states were taking their own initiatives, and many of them were very, very noteworthy. But the challenge has been that there was no mechanism to pull all of these initiatives together in order to create a countrywide common platform. And for various reasons, the process has been delayed, but that remains one of the focus for us in terms of pushing forward the priorities.
Sorry, Mr. Sanjay, I'm going to come in between because of your association with IOM and being head of IOM. We would also love to know in the last 2 minutes of your slot that what are your views on the draft national policy for migrant workers and the labor laws, because you're a very important stakeholder to talk about that for us.
Sure. Thank you, Priyanka. And since I was personally involved in the drafting as well as the collation of various perspectives, I can very clearly share my views. So one of the biggest aspects of this policy is that it follows a rights-based approach. It recognizes the migrants as having certain rights which need to be provided or fulfilled by various entities, primarily the state entities. And migrant workers have also been recognized as a very important part of the society and the economy, which again is a very welcome step forward. And they've also recognized that interministerial and interdepartmental, interagency coordination is very critical if we really want to meaningfully address the needs and problems of migrants. That's again a very welcome step as far as this framework is concerned. And then, of course, something which I was referring to just now is the creation of National Migrant Database, something which the Ministry of Labour has already started working on. And I'm sure very soon it will be up and running. And then, of course, one of the things which we have often pushed for is the concept of the migrant resource centers, because they offer a very significant support to the migrants, especially for the interstate migrants. And that is something which has been very, very categorically recognized by the draft framework as well. So that's what I would like to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been very, very helpful. Also, to know about what IOM is doing, and that there are a lot of positives also in the new policy and the labor laws. And the best part is that it's rights based. Now, I think the bigger task will be to have coordination and implementation, which is always a hard task. Thank you so much for your points, Mr. Awasthi. We'll move to our next speaker, which is Ms. Pearl Tiwari. She's the CEO of Ambuja Cement Foundation. Welcome, Ms. Pearl. From you, we do have a targeted questions because you represent such a big industry, and for migrant worker, that's one of the most employable industry in our country. So we would love to know how the construction industry supports migrants and their rights, and what is your foundation been doing during this crisis to help the migrants? Over to you.
Thank you, Priyanka, and yes, thank you so much, Siddharth, for putting that context. It was a very interesting survey indeed. So as a disclosure first, Priyanka, I must mention that I'm representing the Ambuja Foundation and not the construction industry or Ambuja as a company. But yes, we are a building materials company. Our parent company is. So coming to, so just to give a context, Ambuja Foundation is really the arm which does all the community engagement for Ambuja Cements, and started way back well before any of this law of CSR came into being. So we've been around now for about 3 decades. Our company itself is about 35 years old. And so from the very beginning, believed that if we did the right things in our own geographies, then, we had our prosperity would be shared with people around us as much as we would gain the goodwill and be seen as a neighbor of choice. And really we've done, so that's the reason our foundation is largely in rural India. And around the manufacturing geographies is where we started. Today, we are well beyond Ambuja's geographies, but still continue to remain in the districts of rural India and are committed to rural India, from where, yes, most of your migrants do come. When it comes to how the construction sector can possibly support migrants, I mean, something that I truly believe is that, their human rights have very often not really been honestly recognized. And I'm very happy to hear Mr. Awasthi talking about what the policy is now talking. The fact is, if we can translate that policy into good implementation, that would be fantastic. I mean, so, just like large corporate sectors, such as even our parent company, is now looking at not just violation of human rights internally, and especially the core convention of ILO, which are the basics of child labor, forced labor, non-discrimination, those kind of things, where we are almost mandated, and as a responsible companies, a lot of us are looking through our supply chain. I do believe that the construction industry, being such a huge industry, gets most of this migrant workforce usually from subcontractors, contractors, and that's their supply chain. And it should be almost mandated to them that they should work with this supply chain to ensure that human rights are not violated. So I think this is one big one where they can actually support. Apart from the fact that the base of the construction industry are the masons. And there's never really been most people, this is not an aspirational job, being a mason. If you have to wear a hard hat and be out there in the sun for the rest of your life. And really, this is a job people come into because their family, some uncle, father has been in this job. So I really believe that if we as a company had put together a very good mason training program. And I don't know if Mr. Chinoy will remember, but in the early days of when he was still with NSDC, and we were in our first 1 or 2 skilling centers, we were looking at masonry as a very serious trade to kind of upskill, because the construction infrastructure is growing in India and is likely to continue to grow. And we do want good skilled masons out there. And so we really, but honestly, I don't see that input coming from the construction industry where they want to support masons. You can possibly charge a small amount to other kind of people for skilling them. But a mason is such a person at that low down hierarchy of, of class, that even charging him 500 rupees even is impossible, because if he comes for your course, then where does he turn for his bread and butter? And so really, it has to come possibly, there's even a stipend sometimes you have to give them to continue the work they are doing, I mean, to come and get trained and become a better mason. Who will support that? I think it's the construction industry which needs to rise above, thinking that why should I support masons, because today he's with me and tomorrow he's going to be with another construction house. And they really need to, converge and do some of this. So this is, I think, one area. As for your part, which you asked me about what we did during the crisis last year, as I already explained, we are in rural India and our model is pretty different. So we did very little in urban India where the migrants were getting back from. Of course, we did quite a bit of relief and ration and food packets and all that in Mumbai and Delhi through about 3 NGOs. But more importantly, I think what we did was that back home where they were coming back, we have a model where we believe in creating leadership at the village level. So we have women federations, we have Sakhis, which are frontline health workers and the sort. And we put them in the front to really ensure that those who were returning, and at the base, when the minute they landed back in their village, they were being educated by this group, isolated by this group, monitored for their quarantine for the first 14 days, so that we were just trying to protect our rural communities from getting the virus as much as possible, because the public health infrastructure in those areas is so much more weak. And we've always believed in creating that primary care. Also, when we did a little bit of infrastructure besides the PPEs and all that initial stuff, we believed in oxygen concentrators. Giving a ventilator is a 10 lakh affair, and you can talk about it in a district hospital. But to reach the district hospital is 40-50 kilometers away. And if you can, in the isolation center, just equip those with oxygen concentrators, which run on its own so easily, which are literally for 50,000, you can produce provide 10 of those. And we did that, and it was very welcome, because even today, when the crisis is back, and now as we speak, things are going back from our cities to our rural areas, I can tell you that these concentrators have come in hugely handy to manage this basic oxygen problem that we are today facing. And of course, so all the education that happened with this frontline workforce. Apart from the fact that all the migrants who returned, we mapped to understand who was going back. We have about 34 skilling centers. So looking at if any of them needed to be upskilled, reskilled, we did that during the months they were there. And of course, we tried to create local employment wherever we could, because we were also seeing that happen, that a lot of local employment was being created, and a lot of them wanted to stay back. So in short, these were some of the things that we really did.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tiwari. It's amazing to know that your organization was helping people back in the village where, like you rightly said, there was absolutely no infrastructure. We know that there's no public health infrastructure in villages, and even in big cities like Delhi, I know from friends that they don't have oxygen cylinders anymore. To provide that kind of infrastructure and help to migrants, and we know that a lot of them were not thinking of them or looking out for them in their villages. Once they've been transported from our major cities, a lot of people don't care. So it's amazing to know, and that's why I love platforms like this, that we've been working in migrant worker crisis, but still there's so much more to learn about what all of you've been doing. It's amazing. Thank you so much. We'll move to our next speaker, who's Mr. Dilip Chenoy. He's the Secretary General of FICCI. Hi, Mr. Chenoy. We do have some targeted questions for you as well, because FICCI is such an important organization, in the middle of this migrant crisis, and workers represent such an important industry as well. From you, what we would like to know is, what were the main recommendations from the migrant worker report you launched, and how can FICCI support a model like a much larger model like this? The panel discussion panelist we have today. So we, a public, private, and an NGO and a migrant worker kind of a platform, and how FICCI can support that, or even help in mobilizing CSR funding. Over to you, Mr. Chenoy.
So thanks, Priyanka. I think let me start with your last question first. During the pandemic, actually FICCI had recommended the need to create a mobile app there, and also to enable it to be SMS linked and also interactive voice linked, because not every migrant worker has a smartphone. So but let me actually just spend a few minutes. Yeah, I compliment the survey. I think all surveys are very good, and they lead to art solutions. And I think I would like to thank Ms. Tiwari for actually talking about what work they're doing and the construction workers. I have a comment on that, but later. But what I would like to actually say here is that it's very easy, it's very necessary to understand the nature of the migrant worker and what are the challenges the migrant worker actually faces. And it's not a simple solution. So let me just quickly, I know that I only have 9 minutes left. So I think the fundamental thing is that if you look at a migrant worker, right, there are different types of workers, and if there are companies and organizations during the pandemic whose migrant workers' bill was greater than their profitability. And there are many sectors like this, okay? And unfortunately, one of our recommendations at that point of time was to give interest-free collateral loan equivalent to X number of wages, which that could be repaid over 2 to 3 years, etc. But that didn't find traction there. And what did find traction were two things that one, that the migrant workers who had gone back to their villages needed food support at the minimum, needed financial support in terms of increased allocation of the rural employment guarantee scheme, and then also the state governments need to create a system to map them and skill them. That was actually accepted. But you must understand that the migrant workers could be different types. There are workers who move from the play of stay to work in the organized sector, are on a company payroll with social security benefits, right? Some of them return annually on a holiday, covered under PF or covered under ESIC or covered under both. Some are on the contract and return to the place of stay once a year. And there, of course, as mentioned, are on contract or casual workers through a contractor on daily basis or may not have any social security. Now, the challenge here is that the first three categories, the first who are covered under PF, ESIC, and all are very easily definable, right? The on contract and or casual worker is where we don't have enough data there, and we need to actually understand. And it is very interesting. In many states, right, workers actually cross the border. I mean, you look at NCT and NCR, right? Many people may stay in Noida and work in Delhi, Delhi in Noida, Delhi, Faridabad,
You went on mute, Mr. Chinoy. You're on mute.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's working now.
So then I think the host muted everybody and I got muted in that. So let's then look at, people weren't able to cross the border and work and they lost the wage opportunity, etc. there. The second classification are people who have actually moved from their place of stay and work in the unorganized sector. And here also, actually, the employer has the mobile number of the worker, knows the address. There are a few cases where the person doesn't have a mobile number, it's difficult to trace. There's MSME, shops, tailoring units, warehouses, loaders, unloaders, mandis, roadside eateries, tourist locations, small security firms, taxi fleets, carpenters, plumbers, painters, electricians, masons, others. And here they actually may stay in the same city or commute, right? But they might actually live in another state and they work right? And here the challenge was, how do you categorize these people? And they don't have the ability to sustain, to live in their place of work if there is a lockdown and if wages are not being paid. So many of them actually get paid on a daily wage basis, and therefore that's a challenge. And third, there are other people, and again here the survey points out that maybe some of these construction companies or app-based services or transport are not maybe following the law, but that's a separate thing. But normally the transport, delivery service, app-based services, construction and plantations have to register their temporary workers going in there. There is also another segment of migrant workers whom we don't normally look at in large cities, and it's about 80 to 90 to 100 million of these people who are cooks, cleaning, security, drivers, gardeners, elderly care persons here, who work in one house or in multiple households, and they're very difficult. And during the COVID pandemic or something like that, they're not allowed to enter, and there's some challenge. So if you look at each category, the solutions for each category are different. And many corporates actually try to retain their workers by giving them shelter and food, etc. In fact, initially, the states tried to also retain the workers there by putting up camps and to let them go there and actually feed them. But when the extent of the lockdown was not known, and the challenge about really, the economic impact of that, they looked at different solutions, although that is being interpreted differently by different people in the system. So one of our recommendations literally here was that we need migrant housing. And we said there is a model there that has been announced, and the government has a great model where they're actually building houses for the government officers on a PPP basis, where it's no cost to government, and there's some commercial application in the same premises that enables the person to make it an economic viable this thing. Of course, we had suggested the app-based platform, right? Okay. At that point of time, they had a lot of data. A lot of the state governments had data, and one, we said that we need to integrate all the state government apps so that we can have a pan-India database, right? And then you could look at demand side and supply side classifications of data. And the challenge here was that typically two data points were being used earlier. One was the Aadhaar number, and other was the mobile number. Now both, have actually run into problems of data privacy, and then you need to actually understand how we can address that. And that's the biggest challenge here, because what some NGOs are trying to do actually gets negated because other NGOs are trying to protect privacy data and all of that. It's a challenge, but without that, the apps and all will not work. And the other thing that we wanted to do is that, can we actually create a SMS and app-based solution so that, people actually get information of work closer to their home, right? And this is a very simple solution which is there, then people don't have to travel, don't have to do that. And a long-term solution which we had advocated in our note was, there's a current migrant worker migrates to the job. How do we, take jobs to the people, right? How do we look at building worker housing, redevelop, areas like slums, and look at innovative solutions for transportation? And the BPO model is a very interesting model. Like the government has announced the setting up of rural BPOs, right? And has given something here. So that could be done, and the construction and agricultural sector need different solutions. So in construction, what we have actually found is that if construction workers are housed on site and they're given benefits, then the quality of skilled people and the quality of people looking for a job is directly proportional to the type of accommodation available. And we have done this survey amongst many other things, and actually I worked with Ms. Tiwari earlier during that time in the construction sector. And we need to set up a thing of model of apprenticeships and a thing of recognition of prior learning and giving migrant workers certificates. One of the issues which was pointed out that they don't have any record of their skills here. So, we have made a whole set of recommendations around these to the government. We are in constant dialogue with the NITI Aayog. There is also the NITI Aayog app, which was actually done by QCI and that group there. But I believe that a lot of people have to work collectively to solve the migrant worker issue. One thing is clear, that without migrant workers, the economy of this country will not run. The better we look after the migrant workers, right, the better would be the economic output, better would be productivity. And I think corporate India has actually recognized that. But there are sections of business and industry which have a different view. Our attempt should be to make everyone believe that it is in our interest to invest in the workers. So thank you very much for the time. I think I managed it in 10 minutes.
Yes, you did. Thank you so much. You've made some great points, and my favorite is how you ended it, that one sector or one stakeholder cannot do it. Everybody has to come together, and I think people are coming together, but it's just the need is so big. And also your point on helping us understand the landscape of migrants, because a lot of us work with one set or two set of migrants, but you've also helped us understand the whole landscape of migrant workers. So that's been really, really helpful. Thank you so much. We'll move to our next speaker, who is Mr. Mahesh Krishnamurthy. He's the investment partner at Omidyar Network. Welcome, Mr. Mahesh. For you, again, we do have some targeted questions. We would love to know how the Omidyar Network supported the migrant workers last year. And fortunately, we also got a chance to work with you. What the lessons which have emerged from the Resolve projects supported by Omidyar Network? Over to you, Mr. Mahesh.
Thanks, Priyanka. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be participating in this panel. At the outset, let me clarify that the opinions expressed are personal and not those of Omidyar or of our grantees. So your first question, right? I mean, Omidyar Network is a philanthropic venture capital fund established by Pierre Omidyar, founder of eBay. We have a dual checkbook model, which means we can make both investments in for-profits as well as give grants to non-profits. Last April, we created a rapid response funding initiative and disbursed about 10 crores to about 70 organizations, with the primary focus being on rapid response. And I was very pleased that about a third of this amount came from our employees. In fact, Daily Wage Worker Platform was an RRFI grantee, and I want to compliment you guys on the excellent work you've been doing. After RRFI, we launched a Resolve program in July 2020 to support migrant workers and a similar program to assist MSMEs. Resolve was designed to be a 12 to 18-month program to fund projects that could scale or be replicated and is more typical of the ON approach. Under Resolve Migration, we've currently funded 2 projects and are in the process of announcing another 3 to 6 grants. First, they are an anchor funder of the Migration Resilience Collaborative spearheaded by Jansahas, where we are working alongside MSDF, Godrej, and others. This project, with a budget of about 100 crores, plans to ensure that social welfare payments are made in a timely manner to about 10 million migrant workers. In partnership with Indian Express, we've launched something called Think, a set of convenings to bring together various stakeholders involved in the migration discussion. The first convening was flagged by Shri Hemant Soren, Chief Minister of Jharkhand. And really the purpose of these conversations is to enable a high quality public discussion on migration. We led a convening with Niti Aayog with various states to help identify flagship projects that would help migrant workers, and have received proposals from 2 states and expect more. We'd also made a call for proposals for a migration data hub, and a lot of you have spoken about data. We've received 15 proposals, including 3 consortia. Now, if you look at ONI, our target customer, if I may use that phrase, is what we call the next 500 million. These are families who fall in the bottom 60% of India's income pyramid and are beginning to use digital services. Migrant workers fall squarely in this segment. So even though Resolve will come to an end, most of our work in financial inclusion, justice, urbanization, and property rights will help migrants significantly. That's our hope and belief. What are the lessons learned from some of these efforts? The first is, contrary to many views, and I think Mr. Chinoy expressed this well, migration is central to the India development story. In fact, it is the cheapest recipe for economic development, which helps the migrant, his family, his immediate society, and our country. The 5x differential in per capita income across our states acts as a gravitational force for migration. International migrants contribute about $80 billion to India, and I'm almost certain that the relative contribution of domestic migrants to their local economies is even higher. Now, many of the problems faced by migrants are problems faced by other citizens as well. Inadequate incomes, expensive housing, jobless growth, informal employment leading to exploitation, inequality, poor public goods, lack of citizen-centric policy making and implementation, inability to get disputes resolved, etc. Now, all these problems get accentuated for migrants for many reasons. They're not part of the political imagination, and hence their interests are not taken into account when laws are created or implemented. They do not have social and familial networks in their place of work, and sometimes they don't speak the language. Now, as was pointed out, I think there are many different segments of migrants, but all of them share a strong belief in migration as a path to economic well-being. Among the less privileged migrants, there are migrants who plan to settle down in the destination. There are those who are short-term circular migrants, and finally, those who are long-term circular migrants. Each of these segments have different needs. The kind of support they need is different, and the location where they need support is different. My last two lessons: migrants are rational economic actors. As an example, Jansahas recently conducted a survey and found that 90% of female migrants who went home last year have stayed there. Migrants who returned for work are showing a preference for nearer locations, even if the earning potential is lower. Now, all of this is unsurprising given the widespread uncertainty about how the pandemic will progress, and in a crisis, what kind of support they can expect from government and society. And the last is, while civil society can play a supporting role, the primary role in addressing this issue is going to be played by the government and the migrants. The total CSR contribution in fiscal year 19, and now it's actually lower, was less than 20,000 crores. And the NREGA budget in that year alone was 70,000 crores, which means that we have to be very thoughtful about how to apply the limited resources we have access to. And I believe that our primary role should be to keep the spotlight on the issue for a long time, bring data and propose targeted and effective solutions, and monitor implementation of laws and government programs. Even more importantly, we shouldn't think of migrants as helpless. Relative to their peers who are not migrating, they're highly motivated to improve their lives. If a Pravasi Bharatiya in the US or UAE is a hero, so is the Bihari or the Northeasterner in Telangana or Maharashtra. If we provide them with the bare minimum tools, they will do the rest. Now, Priyanka, I was also asked the last question of what I thought the government should do to address the crisis. If you want, I can give some thoughts on that.
Yes, please. You do have 2 minutes.
So obviously, it's a super tough question. No single answer, no silver bullet. As we think about solutions, we have to be realistic. We're a poor country. With our inequality, the poverty line is 5,000 rupees per month for a family of 5. Hence, finding cost-effective solutions super important. No point demonizing small employers or contractors because most of them are also not really well off. When I think of the solution, I think of it in 4 parts, right? The first is super macro, which is actually not related to migration. These are solutions to issues such as growth, inequality, poor public goods, etc. All of these will help all citizens, but would have a disproportionate benefit to migrants. As a concrete example, having an effective domestic worker law would help migrants enormously. Then I move to what I call mid-macro. While the right to domestic migration is a fundamental right guaranteed by our constitution, our politics and policies create all kinds of hurdles. It's important for the government and civil society to work towards eliminating prejudice against migrants. As a specific example, I believe that the central government should legally challenge unreasonable domicile laws on constitutional grounds. And then, of course, there's the issue of rationalizing labor laws, and I think we all understand what that is. Then I go to what I call mid-micro, which is really better data and ongoing research on migration to inform policy making. And the most important point I want to make here is we need to tap directly into migrants and their experiences. We can't be speaking on their behalf. Okay, these are empowered citizens. Then the next one is really to make government programs easier to access, allocate resources to publicize programs and enroll beneficiaries, rationalize eligibility requirements such as KYC and domicile, expand self-certification. Last but not the least, make voting easier through mail-in ballots and ease of changing place of voting from source to destination. And of course, we discuss skilling and job matching. Then I get down to what I call super micro, and these are things we should do as quickly as we can. The first is to get the majority of Indians vaccinated as soon as possible. The second is to make Aadhaar card a true right by shifting the onus of giving the card onto the government and eliminating address proof. According to the State of Aadhaar report we had done before the pandemic, while 99% of Indians have an Aadhaar, only 75% of homeless Indians have one. And many poor migrants fall in this category. And if you don't have an Aadhaar card these days, you can't get vaccinated, you can't get admitted into a hospital, etc. And then we should consider implementing the One Nation, One Ration card on a war footing. And last, to launch an urban NREGA. NREGA has been one of the best welfare programs we've had. In fact, it's acting as a safety net for migrants who returned home last year and might be a useful thing to think about. And finally, I think the last challenge as I see it is how do we keep the focus on this issue once the pandemic is over? After all, we are a country with many challenges, small attention span. Last year, we were shocked when the migrant crisis burst out, and many of our fellow citizens walked hundreds of kilometers to get home in the largest forced migration since partition. And as we stare into the second wave of the pandemic, it's not clear whether we are in a better position. The only thing I can say is at least the railways are still operational. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mahesh. You've made some amazing points, very, very helpful points, and also tremendous work the whole of last year. And, we are witness to that. We were a small partner in that work. And also, like you said, that migrants generally face a lot of problems, pandemic or no pandemic. There are several issues. So yes, we do have to, take on the suggestions you gave and everybody else has been giving on this panel, but it has to be an ongoing process. Even when the pandemic is over by 2022, 23 or 24, the issues migrants deal with, the work has to be ongoing from all the partners. And they are empowered citizens. They should be a part of it. Would love them to, would love in the future to have maybe a vernacular panel where we could have at least some migrants in the future from, different states and have a panel in their language, whether it's Hindi or, Tamil or any other language. So thank you so much for your points. We'll move to our next speaker, who is Mr. Anil Parmar. He's the Director, United Way, Maharashtra. Welcome, Mr. Anil. We do have some questions for you too. Whatever this crazy, I would not call it second, maybe, I don't know what number of wave this is, started with Maharashtra, and me sitting in Delhi, I was like, oh, Maharashtra is in a really terrible state, but Delhi still has 200 cases. And, it's like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, next Monday, boom, we have like 18,000 cases. So now people can ask the same question to me, but I'm just wondering, what do you think, what happened to Maharashtra? It's been more than a month, about from 50,000, 60,000 cases. I don't know if you can answer this. Second is, how did United Way respond to the migrant worker crisis? We know at Daily Wage Worker, the United Way has been doing amazing work for the past 1 year, but we would love to know from you what you've been doing. So over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Priyanka. And I must confess, it's very hard to follow Mr. Krishnamurthy. I think if we do even half of what he has just recommended in that 5-minute speech, we will cover a lot of ground. So my compliments, Mr. Krishnamurthy. To start with, Priyanka, the first part of the question is medical one. We are trying to ascertain why Maharashtra has such a huge number of caseload. One of the prime reasons, and I think everybody knows this, is the lack of COVID appropriate behavior. We were lax. I know we're talking about population which didn't really bother about having behaviors which were COVID appropriate. Along with this is the overwhelming of public healthcare system in the state itself. And also another probably an opposite aspect of this is also that Maharashtra is testing at a record level. We are testing many people on daily basis, and that is also one of the reasons why we have higher numbers. But to compare this at the national level, I think a lot of other states are also reaching where Maharashtra is, and that's an alarming stage. We are at the second wave of the pandemic, and things have to fall in place. Otherwise, it will go out of control in many states as well. So that's where we are in terms of medical situation. In terms of the migrant crisis that we've seen, what we learned and what we did last year, one of the first things that we did was to reach migrants back home safely and with dignity. We had seen a lot of heartbreaking visuals last year of people walking back all the way thousands of kilometers. And that's something that we wanted to break and make sure that they go back safely and with dignity. So a lot of buses were arranged, and this was a beautiful example of public-private partnership. This was in collaboration of many organizations as well. Karen, probably when she talks, she will share a lot about that as well, wherein a lot of organizations came together and said, this has to change. We can't let people go back, walk all the way for thousands of kilometers. And so many people came together, joined hands, and provided safe transportation to many people. That has changed this year because railways are operational right now, and there is a safer way for people to go back. Of course, COVID remains a major issue over there as well, because trains are crowded or buses are crowded. But still, in terms of physical safety, it's much better than what it was last year. So that was one first response that we had to this crisis. The other one was those who were left behind in not only in Mumbai, because that's one of the biggest city that we talk about, but other cities as well, is provision of ration kits. Now, it's a simple input. Many organizations have done it. But the philosophy behind this was that migrants may have hundreds of issues to think about: their daily wage, their healthcare, education of children, and things like those. But let not food be one of those issues that they have to be worried about. And that's where this intervention came in. And provision of ration kits worked wonders for many of those families. It survived them for a couple of months, 3 months, and that really helped them as well. So this was the second intervention that we carried out. The third one was working at the source of migration, at the rural areas, as to what can we do now, because so many people came back and they are going to spend at least 1 year or maybe more time at their native places. What kind of jobs can we provide at the rural areas? And one of the interventions, again, was in collaboration, was Rozgar Dhabas that we set up in rural parts, especially in UP and Bihar, wherein we try to provide employment linkages at the village level, at the rural level, and ensure that they have gainful employment even during the lockdown or even after that, when they didn't come back to the cities. So that was another intervention that we carried out. Those who came back after 6 months, 8 months, or 10 months down the line, an intervention that we did was employment linkage and government scheme linkages, basically piggybacking on what government welfare schemes are, trying to link them with those schemes and ensuring that they take benefit of those welfare projects, ensuring that those who don't have documents, we try and help them out in getting those documents as well. And so basically, piggybacking and maximizing resources that the government already has here. And one of the interesting, insights of the report that Siddharth talked about was ration cards. Many of them didn't have ration cards, and that is one single tool that provides you food sustenance. And especially in urban areas, this becomes a great tool when they don't have a daily wage coming in. So that's a linkage that we provided, ensure that they get subsidized ration from the ration shops that the government have notified. So these are few linkages that we worked upon. And now moving ahead, what we are looking at is in terms of long-term employment linkages, ensuring that whatever skill sets they have, we try and link them to the employment that is available in the market. That is one. We also briefly looked at reskilling and upscaling. Now, Ms. Paul Tiwari just highlighted this very beautifully, is that when we reach out to migrant workers and ask them, what would you like to be trained in some skilling? Do you aspire to get new trainings, new skills, and get a better job? One of the answers that we get is, what about our daily wage? Because if we come for your training, we lose out on the daily wages. And that's one of the major issues that we have faced. So reskilling or upskilling is something that we have stopped as of now, because we are focusing more on employment linkages, trying to ascertain what skill they already possess and link them to the best possible employment opportunity which is available in the market. So that's where the interventions are. But hopefully in near future, we will look at reskilling as well and ensuring that they get better paying jobs.
Thank you so much, Mr. Anil. we knew of some interventions, but it's so nice to learn about so many other interventions you've done and the partnerships you've done. I hope that a lot of other partners, and I'm getting messages in the chat as well, that they're, loving and learning so much from each speaker. And I just hope like more and more, partner organizations, civil society, CSR, private sector can just learn more from these interventions, because they've been so successful and you worked in such large states and you continue to do that. And how partnerships can be so successful even at a small scale. So thank you so much for your points. We'll move to our next speaker, who is Ms. Daljit Kaur. She's the climate advisor with DFID UK. Welcome, Ms. Kaur. The questions for you we have is, how are the neighboring countries in the Southeast Asia subcontinent addressing the migrant crisis? Because DFID does offer support to the neighboring countries as well. And how can DFID support India's migrants? How can we solve the root causes of this ongoing crisis? It may not be happening in immediate future, but what could be the vision? Over to you, Ms. Kaur.
Thank you so much, Priyanka, and thank you for inviting me to today's discussion. I'm honored to be part of this esteemed panel of experts. I work with India, and I don't have much view on the neighboring countries, but I'll still touch upon it. But before I respond to your questions, I would just like to give you my perspective on the situation. And then I can talk about the FCDO current programs contributing to the situation and reducing the vulnerabilities faced by the poor and migrant workers in the last 1 year. Just briefly, a background on the perspective that I was just talking about. Migration is a cause of some or the other distress, such as climate shocks, water stresses, maybe a political conflict in that region. There is this pull and push factor, where rural situation cause the push, and the urban opportunities are likely to cause pull. If the push is significantly greater than pull, it results in distress migration. And we know that sometimes cities do not offer livelihood opportunities for the migrant who come looking for it, and that's where the problem primarily lies. Climate change, as I'm sure everybody knows, is expected to bring about significant changes in the existing migration pattern throughout the developing world. And we are seeing it across the globe. I mean, especially these island nations, nations who have a longer coastline, who are vulnerable to the rising sea level. I mean, we will in future see a lot of migration from these countries, from these island states, moving from to inland countries and states. And this is going to be a really big problem in the future. So increase in the frequency, severity of chronic environmental hazards and sudden onset of disasters are projected to alter the typical migration pattern that we see right now. This is going to affect a lot of countries, like I just spoke about. The recent pandemic has further highlighted the multiple vulnerabilities faced by the poor, especially the migrant worker who do not have assets to rely on. And we can safely say that the confluence of climate change and COVID has deepened many key health, economic, social vulnerabilities and created new challenges in this crisis mode as well. There is concern that given the diversity of experiences between and within the states, there is a need for greater flexibility in approaches and engagement to prioritize most pressing needs. So, I mean, the situation is localized. I mean, these multiple vulnerabilities are local vulnerabilities. They're not uniform across our country and across the region as well, including our neighboring countries also. And to adopt a universal scheme of programs or an approach should be avoided. Just coming to one of the questions that you asked me on how to develop a comprehensive framework for the ongoing crisis and how DFID contributes. Just kind of giving you 4 underlying issues. I'm sure, and I know that the other Previous speakers have already covered it, and this is the disadvantage of coming a bit last. But the four underlying issues I would like to reiterate is one, the lack of understanding and of the migration pattern and the lack of data. How do we make states accountable when there is no formal record of migrants or informal workers who migrate for work to adjoining states? And like it said, we can't correct what we don't know, basically. So data is really important. Lack of service standards that bound the government to deliver timely benefits to the people. There is no standardization across schemes across the states. I mean, the time taken to respond varies. And the third is social protection and safety nets are really, I mean, in this way, localization isn't helpful. They need to be universal, they need to be portable. And I know the other speakers have also spoken about the portability of the safety net measures and social protection programs offered by the Government of India. And finally, the lack of access to financial products and planning, especially the health insurance that provide necessary cushion to the poor during the crisis. So, I mean, just to kind of get into the solutions based on these four issues that I just mentioned, it is really critical to create migrant workers database and link them to available schemes. I mean, there are several schemes. I mean, if we have a common database and we link it to these schemes, I think there will be a better reach, specifically at the local level, at the state level. I know that there are several state governments who are conducting labor surveys. We heard about those as well. There is still some gap in layering these databases to the multiple vulnerabilities I spoke about. So the health schemes would have their own vulnerable population. The climate schemes or the climate action plan would have their own vulnerable population. But we know that these vulnerabilities are common. The poor are vulnerable and they face multiple vulnerabilities. I mean, be it health, be it social vulnerability, be it climate vulnerability. So I think a larger database on vulnerable population is needed, and that needs to be linked to all the schemes across. The social accountability is critical in accessing benefits from the government program, and if such accountability system can be built in government programs which adhere to stringent service standards, like I said, would actually expedite the process of availing benefits from the government scheme. The third is, am I exceeding my time limit, Priyanka?
No. I was from your points also, the suggestions you're giving and the policies, I just also, add on what I wanted to ask, because you're talking about solutions and the policies which work. We would love to know from you about Manrega and your experience with Manrega.
Yes, I'll just come to that also. This is a big program that we work with, and the Government of India Manrega scheme has been really useful. Just to give you some facts and some figures from last year, I'm sure we all know Manrega was, came about in 2006. Last year, it basically saw 105 million individuals, I mean, around 70 million households using the scheme from 1st April 2020 till today. I mean, I think last month the data was shared in that way. And this is the all-time high for the financial year. The data also shows that there was 80% increase in the demand, which clearly reflected the impact of COVID lockdown and the migrant crisis. I mean, there were so many states who saw returning migrants, such as MP, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, and all saw huge spikes in the demand for Narega. But having said that, I also would like to recognize that the Government of India already have these existing programs like Narega, PDS, Garib Kalyan Rozgar Yojana. And I think it's really important to value the existing mechanisms and strengthen the existing mechanism rather than innovating or bringing in new measures or new provisions at this point, because we are already in a crisis situation. We can't be obviously proactive because we need to respond to this situation, and we need to kind of rely on the existing programs. Just to briefly give you what we do as in what the FCDO does. in India, we work very closely with Ministry of Rural Development. As I mentioned, NREGA is our entry point, and we work on strengthening the social protection provisions. So our program called the Infrastructure for Climate Resilient Growth, which is a technical assistance program, which is delivered by, I would like to acknowledge our partners, UNDP, IIED, FIA network, actually aims to improve abilities of poor and vulnerable people to cope with climate change and its impact by integrating climate information services and risk management into the social protection framework. So by improving the quality of the NREGA structures, especially the NRM structures that are built under MNREGA, we support resilient livelihood, enhance ecosystem services that support the livelihoods of the poor, and in turn help us arrest distress migration in states like Odisha, Bihar, Chhattisgarh. So we've some proven results and proven stories that have shown that how integrating climate risk management can also improve other parameters and other provide other benefits. Last year, just to quickly complete, last year the program basically modified its work plan and reached out to returning migrants, and our partners, as I mentioned, UNDP, IID, and FIA, basically work in 7 states in the central India. And one of the major interventions that ICRG did was to support the district administration to enhance access to migrant returnees to avail the MG NREGA scheme. And we also provided new job cards, facilitated demand for works, identified works in their area and their execution on a time-bound basis. We also created alternate livelihoods by converging with line departments, specifically horticulture, agriculture, livelihood mission, and all. Sorry. So last year, the program basically reached out to 3 lakh people, and we provided the COVID relief schemes. We also with government of Jharkhand, brought out a migrant labor helpline, which gave support to over 1 million returning migrants. So this was done in a span of last 6 months, and we still continue to do it. I mean, we all know that the crisis hasn't been over. We're still in a crisis mode. So we continue to provide our support, not just on MNREGA, but also on other schemes and other relief measures wherever we work in the state. I think I've already crossed my 10-minute limit. I'll stop here. But if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to respond, and I can also put some links on the chat.
Thank you so much, Ms. Thank you so much, Ms. Kaur. It's amazing to learn what DFID has been doing with state governments and independently as well. We know from our experience as well that the helplines were very, very helpful for these migrants when they wanted to go back to their states. And what you were talking about in the beginning, and the suggestions and the solution resonates a lot with what Daily Wage Worker platform, along with the partners, is suggesting as a comprehensive framework to resolve the problems of migrant workers in the future. And I do agree with you that we do have some good schemes and laws in the country, and it's best to leverage on the existing policies as well to see immediate success, at least for the migrant workers for now. We'll move to our next speaker, Ms. Karen Shaiva. She is the head of the Secretariat for PicoNet and the UNICEF PPP model. Hi, Karen. We've been working very closely, and we've been very fortunate to find Karen. How we found her last year, and we started working together. It's just been an amazing experience. So we really, really value working with Karen and her team. Karen, for you, we would want to know that, and especially the audience, because you've been doing a lot of amazing work, that what is the PicoNet partnership, and how do partnerships in the same sector or different multiple stakeholder sectors, PPP, address the root causes of migrant worker crisis? What have been the lessons learned? Because you've been doing that before the migrant crisis. the PPP success model. So we would love to know from you what you want to share about this. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Priyanka, and Siddhartha also as well, because for us, any opportunity to create more partnerships is something that just kind of multiplies our own mandate and take us forward. So thank you very much for the opportunity to work with you all and to also talk about our model, which was adopted by UNICEF last year. As Anil said, Anil is one of our partners as well. In a space of literally 48 hours from a call to execution on the road. Yeah, that is the time it took us to bring together 65 development partners supported by UNICEF, convened by UNICEF, I would say. And, it's not that we were not working together. We were all on the same WhatsApp group. We were all doing same things. We were all working on the pandemic really sincerely. But we quickly realized that there's just so much of duplication and there's just so much of strength that is just slipping away because, everybody's working in their own silos. And so we called for this meeting, actually. IDOBRO, I use multiple hats. So IDOBRO called for this meeting, made a request of UNICEF, and that's it. As I say, rest is history, right? So the Jeevan Rath program was a Relief on Wheels initiative that started, in May of last year, and where we took 3 decisions, very quickly to give a background so people understand. One is that we would go to them. So it would be it would be based on taking support to them rather than hoping that, they'll be able to reach our helpline or they'll be able to reach our centers or whatever other resource centers were available for them, right? So that's how we did a Relief on Wheels. So we actually started food trucks that would go over there, and partners would provide the food and, all kinds of things, sanitary napkins, ORS, slippers, footwear. It was a whole this thing about it. So, and then the second was about innovation. How do we come up with different solutions that will really help us quickly, very quickly? I think the mantra was always about quickly and together, do things together. And so that's where we said, innovation, I think technology is a must. You cannot do without that. And data is a must to make decisions really, really quickly. So how quickly can we share data? How quickly can we use technology that will allow us? So a whole call center that was set up was a virtual call center. And at that point, I think we were one of the first. Most call centers had physical. We said there's no time for permissions. There's no time for setting up systems. There's no time. And we didn't want to give personal phone numbers because that would have been really, exposing our volunteers and teams to so many other issues which we had already faced. And the last thing I just want to again maybe reiterate is that after obviously going to them and the innovation, I think it was about really ensuring that we were creating impact. Everybody was working hard. Everybody works to create impact, right? But at the end of the day, we use that word so loosely, right? Impact. What does it really mean? And so we said we would track the migrants till they reached home. Everybody was working on a model of if the bus reaches their home, reaches their state or their city or wherever they are safe, they're over, it's done. If the train has reached somewhere, it's done. Whereas what we were working on was like literally tracking them as to, okay, you started over here, where have you reached, have you reached, whatever help they required, even on the way. And that brought together so many partners who were helping along the way to make sure that was happening. So it was a combination of making sure that we proactive, okay, number one. Number two, innovation through data and technology. And number three was completing the cycle, ensuring that we didn't stop at an output or an outcome kind of a approach, but literally making sure we know what we said. So we had data we tracked over 75,000 migrants in a space of 2 weeks. Yeah. And of course, helped many more to reach. But these were absolutely solid data collection that we did at that point. And in total, we would have helped around almost 500,000 migrants at that point in time. To kind of in different ways, whether it was food, whether it's travel, whether it was medical aid. We even did cash direct transfers to them. So anyway, that is very quickly in terms of what we did at that point in time. I think the success of that, in fact, the success is such that it continues even now, right? And is helping us in our second wave, is because we identified and very quickly adopted this model, what we call the PicoNet, right? We understand that everybody has a very unique role to play. And once you know what is your unique role, you don't question somebody else, and you don't have to wait for someone to tell you what you have to do. I think that was the first thing. So the PICONET really stands for partners, enterprises, citizens, okay, and ownership. So that's the PICO, right? We need people who have solutions. So you need enterprises. They can be private, they can be non-profits, they can be any kind of enterprise that provides a product or service that you need, right from hand washing stations to, you know, ORS packets or whatever have you. Then, but to take those solutions, you know, further, you need partners who will put in the resources to scale that intervention. And that's where your donors, your other partners, both cash and kind, comes into play, right? And last but not the least is you need citizenship on the ground. So community-based organizations, individuals, volunteers, who will help you gain traction on the ground, right? So these are the three main actors, so to speak, that you have in building a partnership. And of course, if you're going to have multiple partners, you have to have something to hold them together. And that is the ownership of the individual. So I hope I've managed to kind of explain, you know, how we do this as a model, you know, because, and the reason I'm putting it out there as a model is because, I mean, we need to replicate models that obviously have shown success, right? And therefore, because I think we all work, if you take, let's take daily wage worker, right? I mean, we are such disparate partners working in different parts of the country, right? And yet, I think that framework that has been designed now, okay, in the Rozgar report and the you know, way forward is so comprehensive. I mean, it covers everything, right? From legal, awareness, you know, skill building, every single thing, right? And that's how you can do something like that only if you have partners. That's the unity and diversity that we talk about, right? And so, I mean, I'm sure you can tell I'm very passionate about partnerships. And so, yeah, I definitely hope that we get more and more partners involved with the Rozgar project, with Daily Wage Worker, and of course, with the work that we are also doing. And, you know, because I think partnership is the only way forward. There is no other answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's been amazing working with you. And also, I can't stress more on partnerships. And, you know, taking from her example, I sometimes feel Siddharth is a little too modest about the work Daily Wage Worker has done in the past 1 year. So I am going to be a proud member and talk a little bit. It's the partnerships which have driven it. Siddharth is based in Geneva, Switzerland. I'm based in New Delhi. We've never met Karen. We've never met any partners of us. Siddharth and I haven't met. And, you know, we met last, I don't know, 2018, 19. All of us have full-time jobs, and we've only worked through volunteers. Daily Wage Worker, of course, hasn't, you know, gotten any direct grants or earned money because we were setting up the organization. It was just absolutely voluntary. So it's amazing how far we've come, and it's only happened because of partnerships. And partnerships are not always, you know, long-term partnerships. Sometimes we've had people who will just give us advice over 2 days, but that's just been so amazing. And they just came in because they were passionate about the issue or working together. So, you know, like what Karen said, partnerships is the key. And I think every speaker on this panel stressed on that in some way or the other, that either we do PPP, it has to be multi-stakeholders, the government and the private sector has to work together. One person cannot solve the problem. And, you know, last but not the least, that the migrant workers have to be involved in this partnership. And yeah, and I think we will take this seriously and organize another panel discussion in a vernacular and invite some migrants as well as audience and speakers as well. That will be great. We do have few questions in the chat, and then I have one last question for all our speakers in the end. So there's one question for Ms. Pearl Tiwari. Sorry. I saw it, but now I can't see it in the chat. I'm just...
Yeah, there was something, but I think it was more to do with how the Builders Association or some such groups could come together and support. I'm really not the authority to talk about that, honestly. I wouldn't want to take a question like that and speak on behalf of any such groups. So I'm going to give that a pass, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Maybe
Yeah,
you'd like
yeah,
to pass it to the right people.
Sure. We have another question from Ms. Mahesh Krishnamurthy. Is it possible to do some design thinking to create a mega portal for migrant workers by curating, compiling, and analyzing skill sets at state and district levels like Swades and Asim of NSDC?
I think the short answer is absolutely. And in fact, some of the proposals in our Migration Data Hub are focused on something like this. At the same time, I do want to caution against, there's something in the air which seems to treat technology as the solution for all problems, and it is not. Okay, it's a tool, right? And ultimately, it's about an individual, a family making decisions, all of us supporting him if something goes wrong, to having mechanisms for recourse. And sometimes I can't get recourse from my Uber with all their fancy technology. So we should not look at technology as the solution, as the Uber solution for the problem. It's a very, very important tool. It can make a lot of things effective. And Priyanka, as you mentioned, if you and Siddharth have not met but have created such a wonderful thing, that shows the power of technology. But that still cannot feed a hungry child or resolve a dispute between a worker and his employer.
Thank you so much. I do have another question, but I would also just quickly request if any of our partners, Matthew, Parinita, do you have any questions? You've contributed immensely in the past 1 year, and if you have any questions or you would want to, take a minute and add a point, that would be great. Okay, I'll move to the question. So we do have a question that once migrants get voting rights in their destination states, will they be much more empowered? Are there any efforts being made in that direction? And are the two root causes for a big migrant labor crisis, caste discrimination, and lack of employment opportunities? So is it important that social justice department and stakeholders also get involved? I open the floor and any of our speakers who would want to take this.
Let me come in, Priyanka.
Sure.
The answer to this question is actually not a straightforward answer. And that's mainly because the availability of employment opportunities is determined by the industries and the economy and where these are concentrated. So if the government steps in through social protection interventions, it can address this problem or challenge only to a certain extent. And giving the example of Manrega, which was highlighted as a significant step taken by the governments to support the returning migrants. But the challenge here is that Manrega kind of work mainly involves things like earthwork. And it invariably attracts people who are low skilled or semi-skilled. So people who were earning fairly good wages with very high level of skill in a certain industry didn't find a matching job at their native places. So coming back to the question, I mean, it's not that simple or straightforward. It's pretty complex.
Thank you so much. We also have Ms. Kaur. She would want to say, talk about this point.
Yeah, thanks, Priyanka. I just wanted to say we should actually de-link vote politics with social welfare. I don't think so. By just adding them to the voting list in the destination state, will solve that problem, I think it will create further other problems, because we can't find solutions to a problem and create more problems because of that. I do believe the one ration, one nation concept is a good concept. The universal portability is needed, but it does seem simple and noble. But there are other complexities attached to it, like the budget complexity. So each state would have their own budget, and they allocate some amount towards the relief measures or social safety nets or social protection schemes that they need to provision for. And because of that, they probably, and because of the data gap, they probably do not extend that support to the migrants who actually move out, who are in the destination state and who are unable to avail that kind of support in the source state, if I may use the term as destination and source in this context. And this makes the situation quite complex. And I think the flexibility of the funds or these budgets can probably address the situation that we're in. I mean, we need to again move away from state boundaries when we're looking at universal social protection in India.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kaur. Thanks a lot. We do have another question, and that also slightly, like we've experienced that, like I told you, that Daily Wage Worker has done a lot of work through volunteers, and our volunteers were sometimes as young as 17-year-olds, and going all the way up in their 70s. So we have one question from one of the audience members. What can the youth do to help the migrant workers, and where should they direct their efforts? Any one of you would want to take this question up, or two of you, that would be great.
Priyanka, let me take a crack because there's a lot of silence.
Yeah, I was going to put someone on the spot.
No, youth is a demographic characteristic. And in some ways, the youth see the world as it can become, right? And so I don't know if I can say what can the youth do, but there's a ton of things people can do, right? And so one of the, the word partnership came up a lot in this conversation. I think there's another word that should come up a lot more in public policy in India, which is storytelling. Okay, we're all focused on raw data, numbers, and beyond a point, it doesn't mean anything. So one of the things young people can do is really tell a lot of stories, because each individual, I mean, even in this migration thing, is a very personal story, and no two stories are alike. And the difficulty with surveys, etc., is you're sort of trying to mush things together, right? So clearly that is one. The second is, next time you see somebody, talk to people, right? Understand what their story is, and whatever personal help you can provide. I mean, each of us, right? We play many different roles. Whatever you're comfortable with and whatever personal help you can provide, you should absolutely do. So those are some random thoughts.
Thank you so much, and very useful, not just for youth, but across.
So I want to actually, on behalf of Daily Wage Worker and our volunteers, we
do have someone who was talking, Siddharth.
I wanted to go, but I can hold.
Go ahead, Karen.
From silence to okay, so we did a skill development survey through the Piconet actually for about 10,000 youth, yeah, and while I think that would be quite normal what we would expect from the survey, I think one of the biggest things that we got out of it is that they wanted to do more. Yeah, they wanted to take some kind of ownership. And this has been a message, which is my other passion, is working with youth, is that, we keep talking of youth as leaders of tomorrow. You go to any school, college, anything, any program, they always talk about the dividend as something of the future, And I'm like, why? They are today, they're contributors today, they're citizens today, and there's so much that they can do right today. Even today in the second wave, we are working with youth to see how they can be digital COVID volunteers. So there's so much that they can do, whether it is helping migrants with technology, okay, to accessing schemes, to working with them in development of skills. I mean, there is just a lot that is out there, right? That is possible. In fact, even during the crisis last year, it was our youth volunteers who went helping them to fill up the forms, to take them to the stations. There were so many ways. If it wasn't for our youth volunteers, I don't think half of the things that we wanted to get done on the ground would have been possible. So I definitely always would tell everybody one thing: they are not tomorrow's, they are today's. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We do have another question from Mr. Mukut, but I can't find it in the chat, Mr. Mukut. So if you could type it again, or if you would want to ask it directly, I can unmute you.
See, my question related to the root cause of all migration. Of course, we started talking about migration only because after the COVID situation forced thousands and lakhs of people to move back home and all that. But why is migration taking place on large scale all the time? Is because our villages have no employment opportunities at all. The life in villages is still the same as it was in 1947. Forget about mobiles and TV. The life otherwise has not changed. There is no healthcare, there is no proper education. So my question was whether organizations like CII, FICCI can deal with the government, ensure that policies are made towards providing all these things. When are we going to do this? We are far behind many countries who, I mean, what they have done in 30, 40 years, we have not been able to do since independence. Just a thought.
Thank you, Mr. Mukut. Mr. Chinoy, would you like to take this question up? Or any thoughts on this?
No, I think what Ms. Bhargav has said is, I mean, it's one of those home truths, right? We have not got any medical facilities and other things there. But I think in this budget, and one thing that pandemic has done is the focus on increasing healthcare, and there might be a quibble about the amount allocated. You want to allocate more, etc. But I think that's very important, that we need to actually increase health facilities, education facilities. I think if you look at the Millennium Development Goals, which then got translated into the SDGs, right? And FICCI is representing, and I think a lot of the stuff which Mahesh actually talked about, whether the urban Manrega or the other things that he talked about, FICCI had represented there. But the challenge is that it takes time. So, if we have to address the migrants problem, there's immediate short-term need, then there's a medium and long-term need. So all the solutions that have actually come out from here, we need to actually categorize in them and then say, I like Karen's point about, each one understanding the capability and the responsibility, and then, find, your type of a PICO thing across the country and make it go. And we have to focus on the here and now. Medium, long term, something about long term. Medium term is healthcare. Here and now is immediate healthcare, COVID relief. There's a shortage of beds, there's a shortage of medicine, and therefore people don't understand the reason because of the lockdown, etc. But I think, sorry for a long answer, but yes, at least we are conscious of it and we are taking it up.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chinoy, for this answer.
If I may?
Sure.
My point related to the long-term thing, which...
Mukherjee, I think you hit the bullseye actually. What you said is absolutely true. Whatever we do right now in urban areas for migrant workers will be treating the symptoms and not the root cause. One of the models that we have seen, which has worked really well, I mentioned this about very briefly, was the Rozgar Dabba. in villages, trying to link the employments which are available in the villages itself, thus curbing the urge to come to the urban areas, doing the reverse migration sort of a thing. There are multiple models which are available. So this foundation is working in Maharashtra, in rural parts, doing this, trying to make sure that there is no need for the community members to go to the urban areas, because all the facilities, all the opportunities which are required are taken care of in the rural parts itself. It's a long-term solution. There are models available, but I think it's going to take few years for us to reach there. But there are steps towards it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Anil. We are, almost out of time, but I would love it if under 1 minute, all of you, it would be great if all of you can share your viewpoints, how, we can work together. If you have any last thoughts, closing thoughts, as partners or smaller organizations like Daily Wage Worker Platform can work with, all the panelists and stakeholders. You represent such important organizations who've already done so much before the crisis, during the crisis, and continue to do a lot of work. We came in the picture only when the crisis hit, and found about the amazing work all of you have been doing. So for our learning as well, as closing remarks, if you could just share your thoughts on how we can work with all of you, some of you together on this issue. You can start from you, Anil, if you want. We already have you unmute.
Sure. I think collaboration is in our DNA as well. We have worked specifically for COVID-19 relief. We have partnered with many organizations who are like-minded, who are doing something on the ground. And it just multiplied the impact that we were doing, of the work that we were doing. So collaboration is the way forward, and we are more than happy to collaborate in any manner possible. Maybe feet on the ground, maybe sharing our learnings, experiences, anything.
Okay, thank you so much. Ms. Kaur? I'm just going to go panelist-wise, and let's see. Any closing thoughts on this?
I do feel that I think all of us are working with state governments, with the national government through our own way, through our own channels. But I think finding certain synergies, adopting the best practices the others are doing, before that, knowing what the others are doing and trying to find and align our efforts and kind of, like you said, collaborating. So collectively, we can create larger impacts rather than just doing it individually. So I would say a collective effort and collaborating would be my last thoughts. Thank you.
Mr. Awasthi?
Thank you. I would emphasize upon constant sharing of our perspectives on a regular basis. And secondly, bearing in mind the specific expertise which remains with a particular entity or a group of people who would be best suited to carry out a certain responsibility, and having that team spirit to put them forward or to suggest them about certain opportunities coming our way. So that could be a good way to meaningfully address these challenges collectively. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Pearl?
Yeah, I mean, Ambuja Cement Foundation has really grown because of the collaborations and partnerships. I mean, today, even if I look at, people think of us as Ambuja Cements, but only 35% of our budget comes from Ambuja Cements. Most of it comes because of the partnerships we have outside. We are committed to skilling. We are committed to skilling people at the lowest end of the construction group. And if there is any leads, any partnerships that can grow for skilling this group of masons, we've tried them both within our centers, many centers that we have across India. We are also willing to move our training teams into village clusters where these people come from. We've tried this over a period of 2 years with about 2,000 masons trained in the Dahod, Godhra area, where a lot of masons migrate to Surat and Vadodara from. But this was, of course, 10 years ago. So we do have that expertise. We have a good, solid program for mason training. We've done work with NSDC over the last 2-3 years, where we've trained about 10,000-12,000 under the RPL category, where we picked up masons and trained them on a recognition of prior learning module and given them certifications after learning good quality training of skills plus safety training. So we are happy to do all of that. And if any of you have leads for migration centers, that's a problem we do have, not just with this cadre of migrants like the construction workers, but all our other trades, whether it's for electricals or whether it's for nursing. When we move people from, after training them in villages to the nearby cities, it could be Jodhpur, Jaipur, the smaller cities, the bigger metros, whatever. Invariably, in the first 3 months, they have a problem with where do they live, where do they get that money for staying. And I think some kind of what we call as migration centers or hostels, if there are such ways in which we can facilitate these people to at least ease out their lives from the living and messing point of view in the first few months, I think this would be an opportunity to see many people then retain themselves and be happy wherever they choose. But we are very committed to skilling and happy to talk to anybody who wants to partner on it.
Thank you so much. Mr. Chinoy?
Very simple. If there's anybody on the call who would like FICCI to do anything, please reach out to me and I'll tell you upfront, I can do it or cannot do it, or this is the way to get it done. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. Mahesh?
See, for us, we are actually a funding organization, right? So if they're interesting ideas, we would always love to fund them. I just want to make 2 or 3 simple points, right? So one is the point Karen made about partnerships and collaboration, super important. The second is having an honest view of what is working and what is not. I think we often are happy to talk about successes, but don't like to talk about failures. And talking about failures in a weird way is even more important than talking about success because it moves the envelope forward. And the third is around a systems approach to problem solving. I mean, these are all extremely complicated problems. You touch the system somewhere, it does something else somewhere else, right? And so we need to bring that perspective and rigor to what we're doing. So those are just some thoughts.
Thank you so much. Karen?
So I think I'm glad I'm speaking after Mahesh because I'm kind of echoing it maybe slightly differently. And I also say this all the time in most of my, this thing is that, if I start talking about failures, then we have to have another session altogether on that one, which we don't have often enough. But very quickly, I think everybody here has said that they believe in partnerships. For partnerships to work one-on-one, it still happens, right? But if it's multi-stakeholder, it is very difficult. It's much easier said than done, right? But if you really want to, like you said, have a systems approach, Mahesh, then you need to look at the entire value chain. Okay? And that value chain is right from policy making down to, implementation on the ground, traction on the ground. And which is where we need to be open to have relationships, being involved, really being involved. Not, we need the money, we need the support, we need everything, but we need involvement too. And that more often than not, larger organizations do not have the time or the bandwidth to give. And that's where partnerships tend to become very fragmented and the silo working. And, like Daily Wage Worker has got partners who are coming from across India. Some are small, some are big. Same with the PicoNet that we have. I would just say widen your circles of engagement to create centers of impact.
Thank you so much, Karen. I will give the mic to Siddharth for closing remarks, but I wanted to thank everyone. It's been amazing for me, for all of us. We've had great participation. It was very diverse. I am leaving the web link for our organization and our email IDs in the chat if anybody wants to reach out. And thank you again. Over to you, Siddharth.
Thank you, Priyanka. Thank you, everybody, again, for being part of this session. I think it was amazing to learn about all the work you're doing, and hopefully we can collaborate. Just in closing, there were some points that I wanted to raise. One was, we really need to think of how migrants come into the whole discussion on vaccines. They need to be prioritized, I think, more than anybody, just by the fact that they're mobile population. So they're at risk and they can spread it quite easily. And we've seen that happen. Secondly, I think a lot of people talked about Manrega. I think, if we can also focus a little bit on how can we develop an urban version of Manrega, because there's a lot of infrastructure that's crumbling in our cities, and, we can really reuse the resources and manpower to have a win-win on that. Second is we talked a little bit about CSR funds, but I think there's a lot of money out there, and companies are putting it, into their neighborhoods and their vested interests, which of course they will. But even if we can take 1% or 0.5% of that, given the scale of the crisis of the migrant worker, if we can work with FICCI, for example, and with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs to really encourage, at least for this year, all the corporates to put in some percentage into a common pool or, towards their local decentralized schemes, but directly impacting migrant workers, I think we can have a tremendous scale, and that's very easily done as a follow-up to this. And then looking at the comprehensive framework that we are proposing to work with you and, everybody else, which is really looking at data collection. So, of course, you saw the data and it collaborates what you all know, but I think what we'd like to share is the process and the methodology of that data collection. And, as a lot of people talked about, the voice of the migrant and empowering them and bringing them into the debate. And that's very much what we did in our feasibility study, where our NGOs were in the field, for days and days, talking to these people, understanding their needs. We talked to a lot of middle-aged men who were in the brick line industry, and we said, what is your career aspiration? They just laughed and said, well, we spend our whole life doing this, so I can't think of doing anything else. And that's not the best option, And then we talked about youth, and we are very grateful because we're a youthful organization, and Jindal University and many students have supported us. But India is a youthful population, and so we really need to think of them. Secondly, we need to empower them because the government is talking about the gig economy. So, how do we do that? And even coming to the migrant workers, you see that if not the workers, most of the kids, because we hear from them, they have social media accounts, which means that, they are quite savvy and they have access to social media. So using that technology and connection with them, can we create jobs? Can we look at, sunrise industries? Can we look at digital? Can we look at supply chain and all these areas where we can grow together? Secondly, we talked about jobs. So a lot of the organizations are connecting workers to jobs, like we heard about Shramik, Bharat Shramik and Bandhu and others. That needs to, of course, happen. But then we talked about skills, because we have skill sets in the cities, which are different. And we have skill sets in the rural areas where you have more women and families that need to, come out of agriculture, and what can be done there. And I think a lot of our NGO partners are working there. So we heard from Karen, and unfortunately we didn't have time, but some of our partners in Bihar and Orissa are doing an absolutely incredible job working with these migrants, tailors, cattle rearing, goat keeping and things like that, and getting them, from a situation where they are starving to being sustainable and on their feet. And then looking at, from the training, so we had some really good experiences from the Ambuja Foundation and also from Mr. Chanoy, from his prior work, and also with FICCI. If we can just, as an example, take the construction industry, because it is the backbone of the migrant workers. So, if we work with, for example, all the partners, particularly with the, model that you have developed in the Ambuja Foundation, looking at masonry, and then work with FICCI to actually get more of the industry, and companies to train the migrants. And what's great about you is that you've done it in the cities, but you've also taken it to the villages and done the training there. So, places like Bihar, this model could really do a lot, in Jharkhand and Orissa. And then secondly, if we can also again work with, the partners, particularly with FICCI and some of the other public-private sectors, to, in the construction industry, I think there's a lot of challenges, but can we look at the supply chain in the industry as one sector and try and fix it? Because we're talking about government schemes, so can we get these people documented now? Can we get them into the portable schemes? And, and then we come to the legal awareness. So can we, educate the contractors and middlemen? And as I think someone mentioned, that they're also under a lot of pressure, so that they're not doing it intentionally. But can we create that awareness? And say that basic human rights must be there. You cannot not pay these people. They need to have safe working conditions. They should not be exploitation. And if we can do that in one sector and one industry across the entire supply chain, covering a few states, bringing in, a media network and the other partners to show that this model really works, I think we can really work wonders together and really prove that we're somewhere near a middle income country. Because, while the government likes to say that we are, with the current migrant crisis, I don't think we are. So, I would really encourage all of us to, work together and make this happen. And I'm happy to have facilitate a follow-up call with some of you so that we can take this forward, and very excited and thankful to you.